Good night and good morning. Thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure to talk about the future of the food system. I'm representing a food tech fund, which is absolutely committed in supporting innovation around new food, but that's not going to be my subject today. Today, I want to share with you a couple of observations, how we believe the food system needs to change. But let me start, first of all, with a reminder for everyone that, why are we so excited about food? Because food is delicious. Food is one of the most emotional things in life. We enjoy it with friends, family, colleagues, and we enjoy the diversity. I mean, Turkey has such a culture of food and such a spectacular history of culinary arts that is fascinating, and that happens around the world. That's why we love food. That's why food is such a rich part of our life. But we need to admit that we cannot go on like this. I mean, we cannot accept the way we are producing food today, because first of all, we are overusing resources that we owe to future generations. We are not paying attention to the food that we produce. We are losing quite a lot of it. And then, of course, it's also a fact that some of the food actually is not that healthy for us. And that means that there are a couple of factors that are coming together today, which will accelerate a change like probably not seen before in the food system. And the four changes I will focus on essentially are driven, number one, by consumers. Consumers have been very hesitant to adopt new things in food. Food innovation was really difficult 10 years ago, 15 years ago. That has changed, and it has changed because preferences have changed, and consumers are much more aware about food and where it comes from and what it does to them. Secondly, I think the awareness about food being a cause for climate change, meanwhile, is not a hypothesis. It is a fact. It's proven by scientific research. Number three, we are running into a situation very shortly. It's not in 20, 30, 40 years. It's going to happen in a few years from here that we will not have enough protein to feed the people in a highly qualitative way if we try to do it the same way we did it the last 10 years, the last 50 years, the last 100 years. And then last but not least, there is change also in the framework. Regulators are starting to pay attention, which is a good thing, because it will accelerate some of the change. So here you have a couple of observations which are indicating that consumers are much more open for innovation. Alternative protein, meanwhile, has become mainstream. So alternative protein meaning a plant-based replacement for meat, like a sausage, a burger patty, or plant-based chicken. Meanwhile, has been consumed by half of the population, and half of the population is saying that they actually consume it once a week. So it has become something that used to be avant-garde and somehow exclusive. It has now become mainstream. And the growth of some of those innovations is mind-boggling. You see that at the bottom right of the chart. The velocity of growth of insurgent brands, meaning the new innovation brands that are coming to the market, is up to 11 times faster than their corresponding market share, meaning that innovation is really being pushed by the consumer today. And in a survey recently done by Bain & Company, consumers were clearly saying number one priority in food, and hopefully that will stay, and I'm sure it will stay like this, is taste. It's quality. It needs to be something that we can enjoy. But look at that. Number two already is healthiness. It needs to be something that is good for my body. It's good for my well-being. It's good for longevity. And see that on number four and number five, you already have ESG. People paying attention on how this has been produced. What did it do to the planet? How has the animal been treated? How have resources been managed? But accordingly as well, how are the people being treated that are part of the value chain in producing this kind of food? Number two, as I said, is the impact on the climate change. So everybody focused on the automotive sector and the energy sector being root causes for global warming. Well, if we look into the data, the United Nations suggests that 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, including land use, I need to emphasize that, basically are initiated by the food system, 1/3. So that's quite a lot. When it comes to deforestation in South Africa and Asia, the food system is the driver number one, nothing else, almost nothing else. There's a bit pharmaceutical, but most of it is the food system. Why? Because of cultivation of soy. In most of these places, soy is being cultivated. Why do we need more soy? Well, because there is more need for animal protein, and a lot of the soy actually is used for animal feed. The health system, as I mentioned, is under heavy, heavy pressure because some of the diets of the West are not really that good for our cardiological system, and they are the main reason why we have diabetes. Most of the people treated for diabetes have not been born with diabetes. And just figure that out. Annual cost for diabetes treatment in the European Union is 196 billion. Just imagine if we would find a way how to avoid that. We are losing 1/3 of the food production. 1/3 of the food produced on an annual basis around the world is lost. If we would only cut that by half, I know this is very theoretical and very simplistic, but sometimes numbers make an impact. If you would cut it by half and you would be able to distribute it to people, there would be no hunger on this planet because we have enough in essence. And therefore, this is a call for action for all of us because we cannot sustain this. We cannot continue to do it the way we have been doing it in history. And that's going to accelerate as a problem because, as you know, world population continues to grow. People expect to have 10 billion people by 2050. Now, consumer demand of the population is changing as there's higher level of income. And people, when they have higher income, want to have a richer diet. And a richer diet most often comes alongside eating more meat. So therefore, the protein demand is forecast to double. From 2017 to 2050, there's going to be a duplication, 2 times as much protein demand as in 2017. And ladies and gentlemen, if we try to do that with livestock, if we try to do it with the conventional means, we can forget about any kind of pledge on global warming because the greenhouse gas emissions will go massively through the roof and continue to create damage to the planet. Now, luckily enough, and I don't understand too much Turkish, but I understand Horizon Europe has been mentioned in the session before. There is good stuff happening. The European Green Deal has been announced a couple of years ago. There are many initiatives in the European hemisphere that are focusing on changing the food system. But it's also necessary because people are aware. The public attention has gone up through the roof. And I'm sure you have seen some of the documentations that have appeared on media, whether it was Seaspiracy or Cowspiracy on Netflix. And young people see that and they shake their head and say, we cannot continue like this. NGOs have been much more focusing on the industry as much as the legislative framework has changed. You see that on the right. For tobacco, it took almost 50 years to come to some very strict regulation. On HFSS, that means high fat, salt, and sugar, this has only taken 10 years. From the first discussions early 2010-11 until now, meanwhile, more than 50 countries have imposed sugar tax to avoid some of the negative impact on the health system. So there is a lot happening now in the regulatory framework. Some of that trying to limit the damage, and some of that, like the European Green Deal and Horizon Europe, actually really focused on supporting the better version and the positive transition. Now, with all the negative I've been sharing with you, one could become quite depressive and pessimistic. So now it's a morning that we want to share, and we don't want to leave this session without turning to the optimistic side of the equation. And there is a lot of good reason to be very optimistic. The problem is there, and we cannot ignore the problem. We need to be absolutely focused on the realities and on the facts, but we also can be very much focused on what's happening on the positive side. Number one, the readiness of alternative products, whether it's alternative protein or functional food, has really accelerated over the last years. So there has been such a strong progress on maturity of these products, like probably not in the 20, 30 years before. Those products, and I will show you an example, will have not just the promise, but the proof that they will use less resources and they will do less harm for health. There's also an accelerated transfer from academia, from research institutes and universities into business. In parts of the world, this is really very well orchestrated. I will give you a couple of examples. In other parts of the world, it still can be improved. Let's put it that way. And there are very promising ways to improve agriculture. And while agriculture in many parts of the world has been treated almost like a commodity, I would tell you, I believe in the renaissance of agriculture. I believe in the fair value of a farmer providing significant contribution to society, to a healthy society, and to a future which is much brighter for us. So I believe the importance of agriculture will go up every year from here. And that's good news for people who have engaged in, providing good food for all of us. So why are the fields of innovation? I cut it short. This is not conclusive, but it's kind of an indication of parts that are very interesting. So alternative protein has been there for thousands of years. Tofu, horchata. There has been always an alternative to the dairy or the animal-based protein. It's now that the plant-based products have really accelerated with the success of Beyond and Impossible and other brands that have been there. But we also see that there are new ways to do it. And I'm not just only talking about cell-based, which might be 5 years, 10 years, maybe 20 years still to go, but fermentation, like we've been using it for bread, for beer, and other products, has a huge promise. I will show you this in more detail in a couple of minutes. Clean nutrition is kind of the trend of very much focusing on something which is biologically pure. So no pesticides, no additives, just what Mother Earth has given us. It's a huge trend that is also continuing to accelerate. Functional foods used to be an area that was very much geared towards sports and activity, exercising. It's a huge market. It's now actually turning into personal nutrition. So adding those nutrients that I'm lacking of to come to a better health and a better well-being. And then food waste reduction. These are all those solutions that help you to harvest the product and get a high conversion into the market so that you don't lose upstream in the flow of goods in the supply chain, but also in the way we consume. Is it either at home or out of home? There's a large variety of solutions arising. And then last but not least, you have these enabling technologies. If we say plant-based is going to go up in volume, well, we will need more input. We will need more supply of those plants, whether that's almond, whether that's pea, whether that's oat. That's one side. And the other one is there are new ingredients being developed that will be of high significance for some of those future products. Why is it attractive for the business? Why is it attractive for investors like us, a venture capital fund? Well, the food industry is one of the biggest in the world. It's an 8 trillion industry on an annual basis, and it's going to continue to grow by definition because population is growing, income is growing. So there is a huge change happening. The numbers you see on the bottom are indicating the size of the pie for the 4 domains I mentioned earlier. It sounds big, but in light of the size of the industry, still is very small. That means the promise for value creation in the coming years is significantly higher than the numbers that you see underneath. As I mentioned, governments have started to pay attention to that, and some of that has been very restrictive, but there's also a clear indication that some governments are doubling down on the change of the food system. Singapore, probably the most iconic. Singapore has a program that says we want to have 30% food supply from inner Singapore by 2030. Today it's 2%. So they want to upgrade their food production from 2% self-supply into 30%. How do they do that? Well, they are really doubling down on alternative protein. They are doubling down on ag tech. They are doubling down on all kinds of innovation. And this is very much supported and orchestrated by the government. It's very much supported by academia, and it's very much supported by business development. Israel has a great tradition of technology innovation in the tech sector. I mean, so many companies have been developed out of Israel. Same thing happens in food tech now. And what is really remarkable in Israel is this extremely fast conversion from academia, research, into business. So have a look at Israel. It's going to be another success story, I'm pretty certain, also in food tech. In the United States, there has been an executive order from the president just a few days ago, declaring that the food tech transition is a key priority for the country, and that the United States want to, again, also play a significant role. And then last but not least, China. China has included food tech into their 5-year plan earlier this year in January, making it very clear that this will become a priority for China as a whole. So for us in the European hemisphere, that means it's going to be competitive. And today Europe is #1 in food exports, and it's highly regarded. If we want to protect that position, ladies and gentlemen, we will need to accelerate our effort. Why does it make sense from an environmental point of view? This is a summary that I have taken from GFI. You see the source on the bottom. It just tells you how much less land use, how much less greenhouse gas emission, CO2 emission, and how much less water consumption you have there. And on a given burger patty, it's actually 96% less land. It's around 90% less CO2 emission, and water consumption almost the same. So it is by far the much better version of a protein. Now, on the other hand, it's also fair to say that there are some compromises. Some of those products have labels that are very long, and they do that because they want to make sure that you as a consumer love the taste. So there is a kind of a dilemma, it seems, that yes, it's very sustainable, but maybe it's not as healthy as the original. And that's about to change, ladies and gentlemen, because I am a very strong believer in mycelium and fermentation in general. And mycelium is essentially, you don't need to read the whole text, by the way. It's just for explanation, and you can download the presentation later on. Mycelium is the fiber underneath the fungus. And if you use that in an intelligent way, and you use fermentation to basically enrich the protein, you can produce products like the one you see on the right. And I tell you, there are dozens of companies right now focusing on exactly that, creating protein ingredients that are very tasty, 100% naturally developed, and therefore probably are the solution to have less compromise when you eat an alternative protein meat replacement. On top of that, it is even more sustainable, significantly more sustainable than the original plant-based, because you don't need land. Essentially, you use bioreactors for fermentation in a closed building. You can do that in your vicinity, in theory. So you can limit the land use to the smallest fragment possible. Water, same thing. It's actually only 1/10 of the water consumption of a plant-based solution. And remember, the plant-based solution has already 90% less than the animal-based solution. You can do that side by side, the area of demand. You don't need to have the product travel. You can essentially build the factory side by side the place you're in. And then last but not least, they grow like hell. I mean, in positive. They grow so fast. You need 125 days for a normal harvest of a plant. You need like 4 days for the harvest of a mycelium. So that tells you there are a lot of positive things. And that's why we support these things. I spare you the detail on all of those positive impacts, but we as a fund, we are a venture capital fund. We want to create great returns for our investors, but we don't want to do that without having this positive impact in either having less utilization of natural resources, or giving people a fair and, well, I would say attractive, because it also needs to be a cost attractive source for high valuable nutrients, so functional food. We want to make sure that the loss of food is reduced. And if we do that throughout the portfolio, the footprint of the insurgent brand will help all of us to get access to a very yummy and price attractive new portfolio of products that at the same time will help to heal some of the problems that we have in the food system, plus build the bridge for food security. And I think food security will be one of the most important political themes in the next decades. And we have seen this with the war in the Ukraine, how food security all of a sudden came back on the agenda of politicians. It will remain there because of the aspects I mentioned to you earlier. For business, this is the time to pay close attention, because the change is going to be very significant. This is a study from the Food and Land Use Coalition. You can also see the link underneath and can download the whole report. They expect a value creation opportunity of up to 4.5 trillion by 2030. This might be overly optimistic, and I might agree, by the way, but never mind. The size of the change is going to be very, very high. And for those engaging into that early on, there's a very attractive opportunity to participate in that change. So this was a lot of content, I appreciate. And if you're still interested in more, here you have the QR code. You can download a white paper that we released together with Bain & Company that explains all of this in much more detail. So going back to an optimistic view into the future, I do not believe we can do better. I'm sure we can do better. And if we can do better, well, why not just making it happen? And you are a very important part of this coalition of people who are interested in that change. And with that, thank you for your attention this morning. And I close my presentation.